So I've been sick for the last couple of days, which is why I have not been able to film any videos. I was actually gonna film a prediction video for UFC Mexico. Didn't get to do that. I'm still recovering from a really bad sore throat. I think I got like an infection or a virus because I felt so bad this last weekend, this past week. But I'm back with another video. In this video, guys, it's gonna be a different type of video, okay? It's not gonna be a breakdown or prediction or a recap whatsoever. It's more of just, some commentary on the current state of the UFC. And as I was watching UFC Mexico this past Saturday, feeling sick on the couch, with my blanket and all, and I watched, Yair Rodriguez versus Brian Ortega, and I saw how Yair Rodriguez hasn't really improved his takedown defense over the last couple of years, even though he's coming off getting absolutely dismantled by Volkanovski in a fight where I think he should have won easily, especially he was fighting a Brian Ortega that hadn't fought in like 2-3 years, was coming off a really bad shoulder injury, and I just thought that Yair Rodriguez was levels above Brian Ortega in the striking, and it seemed like the fight was going that way in that first round. But Yair Rodriguez has low fight IQ, is very weak, doesn't hit the weights, and just stupid as fuck because in that second round, he decided to go for a guillotine against Brian Ortega, and you're just like, why would you do that? You want to keep the fight on the feet. That's where you were having most of your success. You almost finished him in that first round. So I was just like, man, this is just strange. Then Brian Ortega is able to get the submission. Good for him. Seems like a really good guy. Then, main event, Brandon Moreno versus Brandon Royval. And Brandon Moreno just looked off, man. Since that first round, I was just like, he's not fighting the same way he typically does. And I even thought, man, is there something wrong? Look, I know he changed camps going into this fight, and I thought maybe, that war with Pantoja and all the wars with Davidson Figueiredo have just changed him, because that was not the Brandon Moreno that I'm used to watching fight. You know what I'm saying? I wasn't really mad necessarily that Brandon Moreno lost. I was just more like confused and like with his strategy and his performance and the way he fought. It was very strange. Not the typical Brandon Moreno. I thought he was going to have more success on the feet. Very low output. Most of the fight he was on the back foot. Very strange. Very strange. It almost felt like it was a little bit rigged. I'm just kidding. It wasn't rigged, but just very strange performance by Brandon Moreno. And I was sitting there after UFC Mexico and I was like, man, I feel like as a UFC fan, look, I've only been watching the sport for about half a decade now. And, maybe some of you guys have been watching for a lot longer than that. Maybe some of you guys barely got into the sport. And I feel like maybe the people that have been watching for, a longer time, even longer than I have, you're going to agree with what I'm about to say. Like, there's some things that we must get used to as UFC fans. And this is something also that I've been thinking about since Volkanovski lost to Topuria. And it's just that as UFC fans, we must get used to our favorite fighters just becoming washed and going on losing streaks. That's something that's very hard to accept, which is, like they say, this sport has the highest highs and the lowest lows. And same applies to the fans, because you become a big fan of a fighter, you love their fights, and all of a sudden, they start to lose. And every time you watch them lose, it's like, you lose a bit of your soul. You just get sad watching it. And you're like, man, why am I even watching it at this point? This is not entertaining for me. And that's just something that is a part of being a UFC fan, that we have to witness our favorite fighters lose a rematch, that we have to witness the up-and-comers just dismantle our favorite fighters. And, I do feel like a new era is upon us. Maybe that's something that every generation or every new fan tends to say, but it definitely feels that way. I mean, think about it. Volkanovski, long reigning champion, just lost his featherweight belt, very dominant in the featherweight division. Is 1-3 in his last 4. Kamaru Usman, incredibly dominant, pound for pound fighter at one point. Seemed invincible, was even thinking about fighting Canelo and moving up to the light heavyweight division. All of a sudden, he's on a 3-fight losing streak, one by knockout, one by decision, and one by robbery. Still, he's on a 3-fight losing streak. Israel Adesanya is 2-2 in his last 4. He's been looking less and less dominant over his last couple of fights. So it seems like, there's a new era in the UFC. And the one thing that I don't accept, you know what I'm saying? Like, I've only been watching the sport for half a decade, and I know there's a lot of fans from 2021, 2022, 2023. I see a lot of these new fans just pretty much start to recontextualize all of our favorite fighters past fights. Like, they start to be like, Volkanovski was never that good. He never fought anyone good. Yeah, like that Brian Ortega, he was that was a competitive fight against Brian Ortega. He almost got finished. And I'm just like, wait, whoa, what? No? Volkanovski put a beating on Brian Ortega, and Brian Ortega had a moment in the third round where he could have finished Volkanovski, but even Volkanovski ended up winning that round where he almost got finished. So that just shows you how dominant Volkanovski was. And I mean, I've just been reading all these comments on YouTube, on Twitter, of all these people saying Kamaru Usman was never that good. Look at his competition. He was overrated. Volkanovski was overrated. And I'm just like, what? We're not doing this as UFC fans. Look, as UFC fans, you have to accept that your favorite fighters, even if they're on their prime and they're on these really crazy winning streaks, they're not unbeatable, and every dog has its day, and eventually they're going to lose if they stay long enough. And with that being said, I've been seeing a lot of Khabib fans just come out of the woodworks and start to be like, oh, Khabib, that what happened to Volk, that would never happen to Khabib. That would never happen to Khabib. Yeah, you know why that would never happen to Khabib? Because Khabib would never have the balls to take the fight and move up to the welterweight division, or he didn't stay long enough. So you can't really trash some of these fighters, some of these champions for losing just because there's guys like Khabib who have a very nice and clean record. But let's be honest, that Khabib record is aging like shit because Charles Oliveira beat Dustin Poirier, Gaethje, and Michael Chandler, which I think is better wins than Conor, Chandler, and Dustin. Basically the same amount of wins, and I think Charles did it in an even more impressive fashion. I know he got hurt in some of those fights, and Khabib had a more clean performance, but, somebody just did it like Khabib. You know what I'm saying? Somebody just defeated those three guys in a row, and Khabib only had 3 title defenses. And what's impressive about Khabib is his dominance and the way he never lost any rounds and stuff like that. But you can't just all of a sudden say that Volkanovski is worse than Khabib just because Volkanovski is losing. You know what I'm saying? Just because Khabib would have lost. And if you Khabib fans are so delusional that you think Khabib would have not lost, then go watch an interview with Khabib himself saying, he's like, man, if I stay, I'm eventually going to lose. He admitted that because Khabib is a realistic guy. It's a stupid Dagestani delusional ass fans that can't accept that Khabib would have lost at some point. It could have been against Charles Oliveira. It could have been against Michael Chandler. Because we all know all it takes is one good punch. You could be out. And Khabib did not have the best striking. You know what I'm saying? So I hate this idea from UFC fans that all of a sudden, because guys like Usman, guys like Adesanya, guys like Volkanovski lose, all of a sudden they were always overrated. They were never that good. They're not the GOATs. We shouldn't really rate them that highly. They were always washed. Their skill set was overrated. They were really not that good. Like, I'm just like, no, we're not doing that. We're not doing that. We can't do that. And we have to respect these guys because honestly, guys, I prefer guys like Volkanovski, like Usman, like Adesanya, who actually decide to defend their belts and stay long enough for, up and comers to catch up, because I'd rather see that. Because something that I love about UFC, maybe you guys don't agree, and something that I don't like about boxing is that a lot of these, in boxing, it's all about taking care of your winning streak. It's all about, making sure that you take the fights when it's more convenient to you. And in the UFC, we see champions just fight the best after the best after the best. Like, they're always fighting the best, and eventually they end up losing. But to me, that's more respectable than just protecting your record. And as a fan, you want to see fighters fight at their best in their prime against each other. You don't want to see this thing of like, oh man, Volk, imagine if Volk would have just retired after beating Max Holloway. To me, like, yes, his resume looks better on paper, but to me, it's, as a fan, like, I want to see the best fight the best. And that's part of being a UFC fan. But we just can't be so, I guess, blindsided and so like biased where all of a sudden, because our favorite fighters lose, oh, they were never that good. Like, to me, that's incredibly disrespectful. And I'll take 5 Volks over a Khabib any day, because say what you want, you know, I think he made a mistake coming back to you early, but at least the guy puts it all out there, and at least he's challenging himself. And I'd rather guys like I said, like Usman, like Volk, who, you know, now they're on losing streaks, than guys like Khabib protecting their record and stuff like that. Like, I think Henry Cejudo should have never retired. I mean, some of you guys are gonna say maybe Cejudo should have never come back, but in my opinion, he should have never retired, because when he beat Dominic Cruz, he was in his prime. He could have still faced guys like Aldo, Peter Yan, and what could have been? Maybe he still beats those guys, because at the time Henry Cejudo was an absolute monster. So I always prefer a guy challenging himself. And like I said, I guys like Khabib, the resume looks really pretty, but when you look at some of those fights, they don't age that well anymore. They don't age that well, because we got guys like Charles Oliveira. We got guys like, you know, Islam Makhachev, who are defending their title against prime fighters like Volkanovski, against Charles Oliveira. I mean, very impressive. I mean, Islam beating Charles is better than any win Khabib has on his record. And that's the truth. That's the absolute truth. And I just hate now that, you know, guys like Volk just lost, and I just see a lot of these new fans just absolutely trash old fighters, and just pretty much change history, and pretty much just say that they were never that good, they were overrated just because they're losing. And no, man, that's just a product of the sport. You stay in the sport long enough, you're going to lose. You're going to lose because age catches up. You know, you're not as good. You know, more fighters start to study you more and more as you defend your titles. You know, people are, as a champion, you know, you're always being observed. Everybody wants to take your title. You know what I'm saying? So it was just about time for Volkanovski to end up losing in the featherweight division. I understand that he didn't make it easy for himself. He came back under very bad circumstances, in my opinion. But you either die a casual, or you watch long enough to see your favorite fighter go on a 7-fight losing streak.